I'm Marissa. Hi, everybody. I see one of our clients, Kate, is here today. But I am the owner and founder of Permanent Change Coaching, which is an online health and nutrition company. I'm sure in some ways similar to yours. Um, but what we focus on is really helping women get out of their own way who are stuck in a really toxic mindset and repair their relationship with food, their bodies, and their lifestyle so that they can see really sustainable results. And by the name Permanent Change Coaching, we want those results to be permanent and last forever. So today we'll be talking about that. But one of my other things that I coin a lot as well is that you should eat dessert every single day. And people tend to either love that or hate that. But it's a really great way to learn how to eat sweets in moderation.
Yeah, that was actually the first thing I wanted to go into was just your promotion of like have dessert every single day. All right, I want to know kind of like how you came about that first, and then how people can actually start to apply that, I guess, how they can actually like do that in their own life.
Oh my gosh, where did I come up with it? That's a great question. Honestly, I think it just came through my own practices of the fact that I am a cookie lover, like a cookie monster, if you will. I like chocolate chip cookies are my number one vice. And I think what I really just had a couple of clients do at a particular time was I was just like, huh, you're really struggling with eating this thing in moderation and you keep restricting it and you keep binging and overindulging on it every time you try to, you know, just be good. And so, what if we just flip the script? Completely the opposite. What if I just said, eat it every single freaking day, even when you don't feel like it? Like, how would that make you feel? And I tested it out with a couple of people and I was like, hey, just try this for like 2 weeks. I might be crazy and maybe it won't work, but just give it a go. And turns out it actually is an amazing tool to kind of help someone really just get a different perspective on it, because most people think if I eat a dessert, I'm gonna gain a bunch of weight all of a sudden and everything's gonna go to shit. But in reality, usually it allows them to have a better relationship with said food and just be able to have one and then be done and leave it, which is really rare because most of the people we work with are like, if I have one, it turns into two, and then two turns into 10, and
Yeah.
then I'm just feeling sick and gross, and I've fallen completely off track. So that's been a really big one that has actually helped a lot of people.
Yeah. What's one of the main things, as you said, a lot of times it's kind of hard for people. They're like in the mindset of they can't have the dessert. They can't do that if they're trying to get results in the gym. They're trying to get results in the mirror. What's sort of like the conversation that you usually come across when you have to sort of not only convince, but maybe just like nudge them into like you said, like just try this out for a couple weeks and see what happens.
Man, like, how do I get them to actually do that?
Yeah, like what's like the first thing? Do you literally just tell them just, hey, you're gonna start eating dessert for every day for 2 weeks and just trust me on this to see what happens, or is it kind of a different process?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of just like, hey, we're going to lean into the discomfort here because it's like obviously you have a horrible relationship with this, but avoiding it is only going to make it worse. So the rules are you have to eat it every single day, you have to do it on purpose, and you have to do it even on the days that you don't feel like it, meaning it's something that's planned in, it's not something that's just like sporadic whenever you feel like it, and it's not something you skip just because you're like, oh, I don't need it today. Because what happens when you do that is you really reinforce the mindset that it's always going to be there tomorrow, instead of I have to get it all in now because tomorrow starts the diet or the clean eating. So that has been like, basically I just kind of explain it that way, and then I'm just like, yeah, give it 2 weeks, trust me on this. And some people will give it a half-ass type of try, and they'll get half-ass results from it. But the people that really are like, okay, Marissa, maybe you're on to something, maybe you're not, but I'll give it a go. They, yeah, they really, really benefit from it. I can like name a ton of people off the top of my head that are like, I can actually say no to a dessert when I don't feel like it, or I can like have one and then put the box down instead of feeling like they have to binge every time that they touch it.
Okay. It's weird. I need to remind myself that we're talking about dessert, and you're literally like prescribing, not prescribing, but you're literally telling people you're gonna have dessert even when you don't want to. You're gonna have it once a day. It almost sounds like we're just talking about like going on a walk or like drinking water or doing something like that. Like it's
Yeah.
like we kind of forget that like there is a large group of people out there that they are the exact opposite of like, oh, I can't get rid of sweets. Oh, I can't like it's just like I have such a big sweet tooth that I need to keep doing it. There's a big group where they just don't want to touch it because they just feel really guilty. If they do have it, they just feel like a failure. So I'm guessing that's kind of like a big essence of your coaching is kind of like the way that you hold yourself up to when you do make those decisions, even when you do fall off maybe a little bit. It's like never really like make yourself feel like a failure for it, and more or less just learn from it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the thing about that practice too, when you eat dessert every single day, you will screw up. Like if you do it for 2 weeks, like the first probably 5 days or they might be a shit show. Sorry if I can't curse here.
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
But
Everyone
okay, cool,
asks that every single live. They're like, can I swear here? I'm like, go for it. I do not care.
yeah. But yeah, so like I feel like we expect perfection out of ourselves right away, but like you're going to mess up. Like this is literally something that has plagued people for like years and decades of their life. Like why would they be able to solve it just by saying, okay, I changed my mind, I'm gonna do this now? Like no, you're probably gonna have those emotions of shame and guilt and failure come up when you have that dessert. And learning how to actually redirect those emotions into something that's productive is another skill that like we teach in our coaching. But usually it's like it takes a couple times. You might have a couple too many cookies or pieces of cake or whatever, but if you the next day still eat well-rounded meals and then have dessert as well instead of restricting it the next day, that's how you stop the cycle.
Okay. So let's get into sort of the base topic of what we wanted to talk about was like actually making the lifestyle changes for like a permanent lifestyle. All right. So how do you usually get clients to make the change and then also stick with it? Because obviously we want to get the results, but we don't just want to like get them at once and then be done with it. We would rather get there once and then literally just keep that for the rest of our life, whether it's a mindset success, whether it is a physical or a physique success. What are like some styles that you kind of bring in where like you kind of take them through, like we just want to get there once and then keep it, make it a permanent change?
Yeah. Well, that is quite the loaded question.
Yeah. As I'm
But that's
saying it,
kind
I
of
was
the
like,
point,
okay, we're
right?
going to see how she answers this.
Yeah, so there's kind of multiple parts to this, and I think the best way that I can explain it is honestly just with the methodology that we've created at DCC, which is called our mindful priming method, which is kind of a 5-step process, and it starts with what we call our priming phase. And, I don't say that to be gimmicky, it's literally like just how we do things, but a lot of coaches, what they do is like, especially in this industry, and I was also like this at the beginning when I started coaching back in 2016, but it was really just like all I knew was macros. I knew how to track macros. I knew how to prescribe macros. I knew how to do the math to do that. And I really didn't know anything else. And everything else was just kind of like intuitive skills that maybe I had just built over time or just had known from like being an athlete my whole life or just have being in this space. Things like portion control or listening to your hunger cues or things that like maybe macro tracking teaches indirectly, but not directly. And so when you think about that, I just kept coming back to when I was just a macro coach, I would ask myself over and over again, and I kept having this conversation with clients where they were struggling every time they wouldn't track something. And I would have to ask them like, well, what happens when the macros are gone? They're not going to be there forever. What are you going to do then? And like their answer was like, I don't fucking know. And I was like, okay, we have a problem here. So that's when we created the mindful priming method, where we start every single client and we say, hey, I don't care if you've been tracking on MyFitnessPal already. I don't care if you know how to track macros, ditch it all. Like you can tell, like we're kind of just very like anti the norm when it comes to our approach, but we're like, ditch it all. We're starting with learning to listen to your hunger cues, learning how to portion your food on your plate appropriately, like plate planning with your palm, those portion sizes, learning how to redirect those emotional or stress eating cues into something that's productive and nurturing for you and your mental health, and actually learning just how to be consistent with the basic habits like walking and being mindful of your food and just giving yourself grace and permission to mess up and learn from it. And we honestly spend the first like 3-4 months with every single client on just that before we touch tracking food, numbers, macros, calories. And it's been the number one thing that has allowed people to actually see permanent change, because you think about it, what do people fall back on after they've tracked macros to reach a goal? And what I found is that after coaching hundreds of people through this process with macros or with this method, with macros, I would give them the numbers. Some people would figure it out and they would understand that the numbers worked, but it would stop there. They wouldn't understand why the numbers worked or what behaviors the numbers were forcing them to do. So then when the macros went away, they were hopeless. For some people, it never clicked in the first place. And they were just like, I was like, oh, you're just a lost hope. I can't help you. And that was the wrong mentality to have at the time. But, you know, we learn over the years. And then there's a small percentage that take the macros and understand it as a tool to then get the habits in place, like how do you portion your meals, how do you eat the right things at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, it's a tool, and it really just depends how you use it. You've probably seen the examples of some people will get a set of macros or calories and they'll just fill it with Pop-Tarts and protein shakes, and they don't understand how to eat balanced meals throughout the day, partition their nutrients, or listen to their hunger and fullness signals, because they just, you know, binge eat 1,800 calories at 8 p.m. because they're like, well, I just got to hit my macros. Whereas other people take it as a learning experience to say, how do I meal prep appropriately? What needs to be in my grocery cart? How do I portion these things? And actually make it a lifestyle. And so what I found was starting with macros wasn't a way to deliver that knowledge best, because it only really got through to a small percentage of people who maybe just intuitively could figure it out. So instead, we took all of that information and started delivering it up front so that people had the fallback after they do the like fat loss phase or whatever, to fall back on that's not number related, that they actually feel like they could sustain. And when you start with that, you give people hope, because then they're like, oh, I could do this. This is simple. This makes sense. And then the progression into something like tracking numbers also then becomes a little bit more natural next, because you're already eating a lot of the high protein foods, fruits, vegetables, portions are right. So then tracking macros is just adding numbers to the equation you're already doing. Does that all make sense?
Yeah. So I like that your main approach, it sounds like, is more on the habit-based side of understanding. Obviously, it's the lifestyle things. It's understanding you and your body and what you crave and what you want to eat versus what you should eat, and just how to kind of balance the two out and all that. So I really do like that, because the more that I do coach, the more that I realize how important understanding your own habits are and like creating new habits. Because like I could give somebody the macros and calories, and obviously some will probably succeed with it, but they will only succeed if they like really understood it beforehand, and if they probably had a past history of tracking and it worked for them at some point. Now, for the majority of people, not everyone is tracking their food all the time. The majority of people are not. So definitely just throwing them the calories and macros is not always going to work. So one of the things that you brought up in there, going through your list of stuff that you go over, was recognizing hunger cues. So can you, like, what are some of the things, what do you mean by like the hunger cues itself? And then like, what do you mean by like recognizing it?
Absolutely. And remind me if we have time towards the end, there's kind of like a second part to that permanent change question that I'd love to come back to if we have some time. But in terms of the hunger cues, I really like, first and foremost, a lot of everything that I just described wasn't even me. It was my team. They came up with it. My coaches are awesome. But I've learned a lot about hunger cues and listening to them through my own insufficiencies with them. Because I have a background in athletics, I have a background in bodybuilding. I did that for like 4 years. So I very much like grew up in this space on macros, and just like you eat what you eat because it's for your goals, and it doesn't matter if you're hungry or full, just
Yeah,
eat
just
the
putting
thing.
food down your throat just because, it's like, this is what I have to eat. I'm going to do it. And yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But then you get the clients that ask the question, what happens if I haven't hit my macros, but I'm not hungry? And like that becomes a more nuanced question that I have to answer over time. And I'm like, all right, like, well, how do I really answer that? And so it comes back to like understanding your hunger cues is really just like the difference between physiological hunger and like boredom or stress or emotional triggers to eat. And so we have a 4 like level system that like easily allows our clients to identify like where are they on the hunger scale? Are they ravenous and they waited way too long to eat? Are they not hungry at all? Are they just in the right amount of hunger that they should eat a meal? And what we found is that when you start putting like an identification system to that, people will start to notice when they go to eat, why am I eating right now? Like they just start to think about it. The mindfulness is there. So it's really just bringing mindfulness to why am I eating? Am I eating because I'm actually hungry, or am I bored, or am I emotional? Am I stressed? And then people start to recognize their own triggers for emotional eating, for stress eating, and understanding that's not the behavior that I want to perpetuate from this trigger. What else can I do? And then we insert new habit there. But then we can kind of better identify between that and physiological hunger, and also not letting it go so long that we're just starving. But we really just want to practice, like, as simple as it sounds, practice eating when you're actually hungry for a meal, meaning you have that like slight energy dip, your stomach feels a little empty, it starts to growl a little bit, and you're definitely like, you're losing focus on whatever you're doing because you're actually kind of hungry. Before that, we want to just think about not, eating a full meal, or trying to just time our day out appropriately so that we're not eating when we're not hungry and just ignoring that and having really weird patterns. Because if you do this over time, your body will kind of fall into a natural rhythm of like a breakfast or lunch or dinner, etc. And of course, your schedule plays a role in it when you can actually eat. But over time, it becomes like a regular cadence, and you start to have predictable hunger signals. You get to hungry before each meal. You don't have as many cravings or the will to snack between meals as much, and the nutrition overall becomes more consistent when those hunger levels are acknowledged. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love like everything of what you just said there. One of the best things I think was, if I'm saying this right, you practice trying to like work up to your meals almost, where you like, maybe if you don't have a meal, maybe you don't usually have a breakfast. Instead, you just start off with like a snack in the morning. Is that kind of right? And then you kind of build it
Yeah,
up.
like just not forcing it. And this is a question we often get a lot of times. Clients are starting and they're like, I'm not hungry in the morning, but I know I should probably eat a breakfast. So like, where's the line there, right? There's no complete right or wrong answer. But like, right, if the goal is listen to our hunger cues, something to also consider is most of the time our dysregulated hunger cues are our own self-perpetuated problem. Meaning, if we are the typical yo-yo dieter or someone who's trying to be healthy, what do? We skip breakfast in the name of saving calories. Then we have a salad or a smoothie or some protein bar for lunch because we're like, well, I'll keep it light, right? Saving calories. And then by the time it's dinner time, we are way too hungry. So we gorge on everything possible, overeat, we're super full, it's late in the evening. So we wake up, guess what? Not hungry because we ate 90% of our calories before bed.
Yeah.
And so it's our own self-perpetuated problem. And so the only way to reverse that is to start like you said, pushing it a little bit more earlier in the day. So maybe instead of a full breakfast that we're not hungry for, if we're still, we haven't had a meal by like 10 or 11 in the morning, let's just have a snack. And like, let's start moving those calories back and have a solid lunch so that by the time we get to dinner the next day, we don't fall into that same cycle again. So that's a great point.
Yeah, I love, because I mean, everything kind of comes back to, if we want to make these permanent changes, we have to be able to stick with them. And if we're going to stick with them, it's like, usually we can't make the big changes all at once. It's one of the big things that I see. Like, I'm a personal trainer in a big box gym. And so like, I'm meeting new people every single week when they first join the gym, and they're coming in with all the motivation, and they're all hyped and ready to go. Like, they've invested in the gym, they've invested in themselves. And the motivation, like I tell them straight up, like it's gonna wear down a little bit. Do you really think you can keep up with this whole like new way of eating that you've like pretty much just told me you're changing your entire diet of going from 0 days a week
Yeah.
at the gym to like 5 or 6 days a week at the gym? Do you really think you can keep that up even when the motivation goes down? Because right now it seems totally doable. You're filled with excitement. You're doing something new. You're challenging yourself a little bit. And you're like ready to go. But the too big of changes is usually what kills people the most. So I really
Yeah.
love the fact that everything you're doing in this is just like the small changes, building up to it. That's really good. So the hunger cues is
Thank
really
you.
good too, because just recognizing yourself, like the boredom thing, I think might be the biggest thing ever. I was just talking to a client
Yeah.
last week about it, about like, all right, when's the most time you really think you kind of snack and do all that stuff? She goes, honestly, it's when I'm bored and just sitting in front of the TV. And like my first thought was like, okay, this would probably screw her over if I would have straight up just tell her, don't do that anymore. You're not allowed to eat in front of the TV anymore. So for someone
Right.
like that, would you say you can go into more of a like, let's substitute the food out so she can still keep the habit? Or would we kind of just change it from something else from the watching TV just
Mm.
to change that habit in general? And I know this might be individual from person to person, but like, what would your take be on that?
I honestly think it's neither. And I think it's put the mindfulness in place of the instruction is, hey, listen to your hunger cues this week. Let's put this system in place so you can recognize like what is hunger versus boredom versus stress eating. And I just want you to like write it down in a food journal or like on your calendar or make notes to yourself or to me. And just like when you notice that you're doing these certain things or you're eating when you're hungry or you're not, let's just don't judge yourself for it. That's where we go wrong, is we judge ourselves and we get into the whole shame cycle. No judgment. We're just observing and we're just seeing what our patterns are. Because what's going to happen with that person is with that instruction, she might question whether or not she wants to eat in front of the TV at all, because she's going to be like, am I hungry? I don't know. Probably not. This is just my habit that I eat in front of the TV every time. Man, that's a dysfunctional habit. Do I need to be doing this still? And like the most powerful change is when a client comes to that realization on their own, right? And so it's just providing the platform and the framework for them to facilitate that change without us having to impose rules on a person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's I wanted to ask you was like how much success do you see from your clients when they get to the point of them realizing, like what they're doing and the change that need or the habit that they're doing rather than you recognizing the habit and then you telling them. Because obviously there's a difference there between the coach noticing something and saying you're doing this because of maybe this reason, and then the actual person themselves admitting and saying, "Oh, this is the reason why I'm bored eating in front of the TV. This is or stress eating or doing something like that." How much success is there really?
Yeah. I mean, a ton. And I think honestly, as a coach, I've kind of like taken myself off the pedestal over the years, because even if we can see a full food log of what they're eating, we don't know the psychology behind it ever, right? And so if we're looking at someone's My Fitness log and we're like, oh, there's like this popcorn and it's like their snack at night, maybe they were bored eating. We're just making assumptions, and so like any assumption placed on someone is usually not going to go over well. Period. And that's just like principles of communication. So like just allowing them to have that awareness, I think, on it, and just taking ourselves out of the expert seat and saying like, you are the expert of your own psychology and body, and we're just here to provide you with the tools to better understand yourself. And if we can get them to just start thinking about that, usually the changes just happen on their own. And I used to see this happen sometimes when like a client, I'd be like, go track your food, just like see what comes up in My Fitness Pal when you plug in everything you eat. Same thing, right? We start to get aware. We start to judge ourselves a little bit. Oh, I have to turn this into my coach. Okay, not eating that, right? Some of the changes just come
Yeah.
naturally based on the awareness.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate though, right here. So wouldn't you say that there could be some benefit in when they do, fall off? I don't know how well you like using that, but like if they do fall off and they
Mm-hmm.
probably have more than what they should, and maybe, obviously not even a 1 day thing. Maybe this is like a multi-day or week thing. And then they do
Yeah.
feel pretty like, shitty about themselves. And it kind of like gives them that little bit of motivation to kind of get back on the horse. All right. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, because in my opinion, I think I
Mm-hmm.
can see a lot of benefit in that. where I'm like, okay, you feel a little shitty about yourself. You kind of just did take a week off for like
Yeah.
almost no reason. Like it wasn't like you're on vacation or something, it just randomly fell off. So let's use that motivation a little bit just to kind of get back into our daily habit.
Yeah. Um, Multifaceted answer to this. I think that there is some level of a male and female dynamic with this, where like a man might be able to just do that better,
Yeah.
because as females, we're such emotional creatures and we're driven by, failure and shame. And like a lot of times we take those to the extremes, especially the people that are like captivated by coaching programs like ours. So I will say I've seen a trend of like men can kind of take to that kind of shaming a little bit better, self-shaming, if you will. Um, and second part to that answer, I think there's probably three parts. Second part is, if there's no shame, then the person, like, there is a certain level that is healthy, because like if there is none, then we don't want to change. And I think sometimes we go so far in the direction of like, you can never feel shameful for anything ever and never feel
That,
bad about yourself.
that's
I
what I
don't
wanted to
really
get. I
think it's,
wanted to make sure. I was like, are we in
yeah,
that boat right here
no,
or what?
not in that camp. I think like everyone, like, there's a healthy amount. It is a small amount though, to know like I don't accept this and I do want to change. Like, and I don't even know if I'd call that shame, but just misalignment with like what your values are. And then the third part to that answer is, the majority of it though is if we are in the camp of somebody who will take that shame to the extreme of then self-sabotaging, and it's unhealthy for them to actually experience that shame and discomfort there, then it's really all a game of self-compassion. Can we give ourselves the compassion that we need to actually forgive ourselves so that we can move forward? Because usually the people in this space that at least I work with are people that when they experience that shame, it spirals. And so if we can't pull ourselves out of that with grace and with compassion, either from the coach or to themselves, teaching them to give it to themselves, then they just continue on the downward instead of being able to actually stand back up.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Before we go, you said there was a second part to that permanent change that you wanted to go into. What was that?
Yes. I think that the final piece to permanent change is just recognizing that I'll say it simply, permanent change is not the absence of falling off track. It's just knowing your non-negotiables and knowing that you can pull yourself back in at any time. It's the tools, the knowledge, and the skills that are required to always bring yourself back on track, even if you fall off. And it has a lot less to do with reaching the dream physique and never gaining a pound ever again. So I think it's just the mindset shift of what permanent really means in that context, because I think it's misconstrued of like, once I lose the weight, I'll never gain it back again. That's
Yeah.
not necessarily true. Maybe you might gain a couple pounds back, but maybe instead of gaining 100 back, you gain 25 and then you lose that again. And it's just a constant journey, as we always say, but I think it's just putting it into that lens.
Okay.